Our new podcast, Daily English Conversations for Advanced English. Fun and easy, practice conversation takes you into the world of complex and engaging grammatical structures. This podcast is specially designed to introduce you to advanced grammar structures in a creative and interesting way. Each episode carefully explores key phrases and vocabulary, repeated to help you easily use them in everyday conversations. By listening to this podcast, you'll not only improve your grammar skills but also find each episode surprising and intriguing. If you're looking for an effective and engaging way to master complex grammar, tune in now and immerse yourself in the fascinating world of English grammar. Hello everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Sophia.
Hello, and I'm Mason.
Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of complex grammatical structures in English. This is a topic that can be a bit intimidating, but we promise to make it as enjoyable and informative as possible.
That's right, Sophia. Complex grammatical structures are essential for advanced English learners. They can make your speech and writing more precise, nuanced, and sophisticated.
Absolutely. So, let's start with a fundamental question. What exactly do we mean by complex grammatical structures?
Good question. Complex grammatical structures refer to sentences that go beyond the basic subject-verb-object format. They include things like relative clauses, conditionals, passive constructions, and more.
Let's break that down. One common complex structure is the relative clause. Mason, can you explain what a relative clause is and give an example?
Sure thing. A relative clause provides extra information about a noun and usually starts with a relative pronoun like who, whom, which, or that. For example, in the sentence "the book that I read was fascinating," the phrase "that I read" is a relative clause adding information about the book.
Got it. So, the main sentence is "the book was fascinating," and the relative clause "that I read" gives us more detail.
Exactly. Another example could be, "The woman who lives next door is a doctor." Here, "who lives next door" is the relative clause giving us more information about the woman.
That's a great example. Now, let's talk about conditionals. Mason, what are conditionals, and why are they important?
Conditionals are sentences that describe a condition and a result. They are important because they allow us to talk about possibilities, hypothetical situations, and their consequences. There are several types of conditionals: 0, first, second, and third.
Can you give us an example of each type?
Sure. A 0 conditional is used for general truths such as if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. The condition is if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius and the result is it boils.
Right, that's a general truth. What about the first conditional?
The first conditional is used for real and possible situations. For example, if it rains tomorrow, we will cancel the picnic. The condition is if it rains tomorrow, and the result is we will cancel the picnic.
That makes sense. Now, how about the second conditional?
The second conditional talks about hypothetical or unlikely situations. For example, if I won the lottery, I would travel the world. Here, the condition is if I won the lottery, and the result is I would travel the world.
And the third conditional?
The third conditional is used for past hypothetical situations, something that didn't happen. For example, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. The condition is if I had studied harder, and the result is I would have passed the exam.
Those examples are really helpful. Let's move on to passive constructions. Mason, can you explain what a passive construction is and give an example?
Of course, a passive construction is used when the focus is on the action or the recipient of the action rather than the doer. For example, the cake was baked by my grandmother. Here, the focus is on the cake, which is the recipient of the action, rather than on my grandmother, who is the doer.
So, in a passive sentence, the subject of the sentence is the recipient of the action.
Exactly. Another example is the project was completed on time. Here, the focus is on the project, the recipient of the action, rather than on who completed it.
Great examples, Mason. Now, let's discuss some advanced phrases and words that are often used in complex sentences.
Sure, words and phrases like although, despite, in spite of, nevertheless, however, and on the other hand are often used to add complexity to sentences.
Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. For instance, although it was raining, we decided to go for a hike. Here, although introduces a contrasting idea. Another example is, despite the challenges, she succeeded in her mission. The word despite is used to show contrast.
And what about nevertheless and however?
Nevertheless and however are used to introduce a contrasting statement. For example, he didn't like the movie. Nevertheless, he watched it until the end, or she was tired. However, she continued to work. Both words indicate a contrast between the two clauses.
Those are very useful. Let's also talk about some idiomatic expressions that can add depth to advanced conversations.
Idiomatic expressions are great for making your language sound more natural and fluent. Expressions like break the ice, hit the nail on the head, under the weather, and a blessing in disguise can add color to your conversations.
Could you give us examples with those idioms?
Sure. Break the ice means to make people feel more comfortable. For example, he told a joke to break the ice at the meeting. Hit the nail on the head means to be exactly right. For example, you hit the nail on the head with your analysis.
And under the weather.
Under the weather means feeling sick. For example, she's feeling under the weather today and won't be coming to work. Lastly, a blessing in disguise means something that seems bad at first but turns out to be good. For example, losing that job was a blessing in disguise because it led her to a better opportunity.
Those are fantastic examples, Mason. Before we wrap up, could you repeat some of the key phrases and words we discussed today and explain them again?
Of course, let's start with relative clause. A relative clause provides extra information about a noun. For example, the book that I read was fascinating. Here, that I read is the relative clause.
Next, conditionals. We discussed 0, first, second, and third conditionals.
Right. 0 conditional is for general truths like if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius. It boils. First conditional is for real and possible situations like if it rains tomorrow, we will cancel the picnic. Second conditional is for hypothetical situations. Like if I won the lottery, I would travel the world. Third conditional is for past hypotheticals, like if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam.
We also talked about passive constructions.
Yes, a passive construction focuses on the action or recipient of the action. For example, the cake was baked by my grandmother. Here, the focus is on the cake.
And we covered advanced phrases like although and despite.
Correct. Although introduces a contrasting idea, like although it was raining, we decided to go for a hike. Despite shows contrast, as in despite the challenges, she succeeded in her mission.
Finally, idiomatic expressions like break the ice and hit the nail on the head.
Yes, break the ice means to make people feel more comfortable, like he told a joke to break the ice at the meeting. Hit the nail on the head means to be exactly right, as in you hit the nail on the head with your analysis.
This has been a wonderful discussion, Mason. Thank you for explaining these complex grammatical structures so clearly. Now, we introduced complex grammatical structures. Today, we'll dive deeper into these structures and explore them further.
Yes, Sophia, complex grammatical structures can really elevate your English skills, making your communication more precise and expressive.
Absolutely. Let's start with a review of relative clauses. Mason, can you explain them again and give us some more examples?
Sure. A relative clause provides extra information about a noun and usually begins with a relative pronoun like who, whom, which, or that. For example, the house that Jack built is on the hill. Here, that Jack built is the relative clause providing more information about the house.
Great. Another example might be, the artist who painted this picture is famous. In this case, who painted this picture is the relative clause.
Exactly. Remember, the relative clause helps specify which person or thing we are talking about.
Let's move on to conditionals. We touched on these last time, but let's go deeper. Can you remind us what conditionals are?
Conditionals are sentences that describe a condition and its result. There are several types: zero, first, second, and third conditionals.
Can you give us more detailed examples of each?
Sure. The zero conditional is used for general truths. For example, if you mix red and blue, you get purple. The condition is if you mix red and blue, and the result is you get purple.
That's straightforward. What about the first conditional?
The first conditional is used for real and possible situations. For instance, if I finish my work early, I will go for a walk. The condition is if I finish my work early, and the result is I will go for a walk.
And the second conditional?
The second conditional talks about hypothetical or unlikely situations. For example, if I were a millionaire, I would buy a yacht. The condition is if I were a millionaire, and the result is I would buy a yacht.
Lastly, the third conditional.
The third conditional is used for past hypothetical situations, something that didn't happen. For example, if I had known about the meeting, I would have attended. The condition is if I had known about the meeting, and the result is I would have attended.
Those are excellent examples. Let's talk about passive constructions again. Can you explain them and give more examples?
Absolutely. A passive construction is used when the focus is on the action or the recipient of the action, rather than the doer. For example, the report was written by the manager. Here, the report is the recipient of the action, and was written indicates the passive voice.
Another example could be, the cake was eaten by the children. In this sentence, the cake is the focus, and was eaten shows the passive construction.
Exactly. Passive constructions are useful when the doer is unknown, unimportant, or obvious from context.
Now, let's discuss some advanced phrases and words that are often used in complex sentences. Could you give us some examples and explain them?
Sure. Words and phrases like although, despite, nevertheless, however, moreover, and on the other hand are commonly used to add complexity to sentences.
Can you give examples for each of these phrases?
Certainly, although introduces a contrasting idea. For example, although it was raining, we went for a hike. The phrase although it was raining contrasts with we went for a hike.
What about despite?
Despite is similar to although, but it's followed by a noun or noun phrase. For instance, despite the rain, we went for a hike. Here, the rain is a noun and despite shows the contrast.
And nevertheless.
Nevertheless introduces a statement that contrasts with what has been said before. For example, it was raining. Nevertheless, we went for a hike. It indicates that the action was taken despite the previous condition.
How about however?
However is used to introduce a contrast as well. For example, it was raining. However, we decided to go for a hike. It shows a contrast between the two clauses.
Can you give an example with moreover?
Moreover is used to add information. For example, the project was successful. Moreover, it was completed ahead of schedule. It adds extra information to the initial statement.
And finally, on the other hand.
On the other hand is used to present a contrasting point of view. For example, I love living in the city. On the other hand, the countryside is more peaceful. It shows a different perspective.
Those are all great examples, Mason. Let's also explore some idiomatic expressions that can add depth to advanced conversations.
Idiomatic expressions are fantastic for making your language sound more natural and fluent. Phrases like spill the beans, hit the ground running, burn the midnight oil, and the ball is in your court can really enrich your speech.
Could you give us examples with those idioms?
Sure. Spill the beans means to reveal a secret. For example, she accidentally spilled the beans about the surprise party. Hit the ground running means to start something energetically. For example, he hit the ground running on his first day at the new job.
And burn the midnight oil.
Burn the midnight oil means to work late into the night. For instance, she had to burn the midnight oil to finish the project on time.
What about the ball is in your court?
The ball is in your court means it's your turn to take action. For example, I've done my part, now the ball is in your court.
Those idioms are very colorful and useful. Before we wrap up, could you repeat some of the key phrases and words we discussed today and explain them again?
Of course, let's start with relative clause. A relative clause provides extra information about a noun. For example, the house that Jack built is on the hill. Here, that Jack built is the relative clause.
Next, conditionals. We discussed 0, first, second, and third conditionals.
Right. 0 conditional is for general truths, like if you mix red and blue, you get purple. First conditional is for real and possible situations, like if I finish my work early, I will go for a walk. Second conditional is for hypothetical situations, like if I were a millionaire, I would buy a yacht. Third conditional is for past hypotheticals, like if I had known about the meeting, I would have attended.
We also talked about passive constructions.
Yes, a passive construction focuses on the action or recipient of the action. For example, the report was written by the manager. Here, the report is the focus, and was written indicates the passive voice.
And we covered advanced phrases like although and despite.
Correct. Although introduces a contrasting idea, like although it was raining, we went for a hike. Despite shows contrast, as in despite the rain, we went for a hike.
Finally, idiomatic expressions like spill the beans and hit the ground running.
Yes, spill the beans means to reveal a secret, as in she accidentally spilled the beans about the surprise party. Hit the ground running means to start something energetically, like he hit the ground running on his first day at the new job.
Now, we're going to focus on practicing and applying complex grammatical structures. This will be an engaging session where we put theory into practice.
Absolutely, Sophia. We'll make this session both fun and educational, using real-life examples and entertaining stories to illustrate these concepts.
Let's start with a quick recap of what we've covered so far. We discussed relative clauses, conditionals, passive constructions, and advanced phrases. We also touched on idiomatic expressions.
That's right. We'll dive deeper into each of these areas and show how you can use them in everyday conversations. Let's start with relative clauses. Sophia, can you give us an example?
Sure. Here's a story to illustrate. Imagine you're at a party. You meet someone who says, "I'm the person who organized this event." The relative clause who organized this event gives you more information about the person.
That's a great example. So, the main sentence is I'm the person, and the relative clause who organized this event provides extra detail.
Exactly. Here's another one. The car that she bought last week is already having issues. The relative clause that she bought last week specifies which car we're talking about.
Let's repeat those key phrases. I'm the person who organized this event. The car that she bought last week. Notice how these clauses give us essential details.
Yes, and they make our sentences richer and more informative. Now, let's practice using conditionals. Mason, can you share a story that uses conditionals?
Sure. Imagine you're planning a trip with friends. You might say, if it rains this weekend, we will go to the museum instead of the park. This is a first conditional, talking about a real and possible future situation.
And if you're discussing a hypothetical situation, you might say, if I won the lottery, I would travel around the world. That's a second conditional.
Right, and for past hypotheticals, you could say, if I had known about the sale, I would have bought a new phone. This is a third conditional.
Let's repeat those key phrases. If it rains this weekend, we will go to the museum. If I won the lottery, I would travel around the world. If I had known about the sale, I would have bought a new phone.
Repeating these phrases helps reinforce the structure and usage of conditionals. Now, let's talk about passive constructions. Here's a story to illustrate. Imagine you're talking about a project at work. You might say, the report was completed by the team ahead of schedule.
In this sentence, the report is the focus, and was completed by the team is the passive construction, highlighting the action and the recipient of the action.
Here's another example. The cake was eaten by the children. The focus is on the cake, and was eaten by the children is the passive construction.
Let's repeat those key phrases. The report was completed by the team. The cake was eaten by the children.
Now, let's explore some advanced phrases and words. Words like although, despite, nevertheless, and however add complexity to our sentences. Let's use them in a story.
Imagine you're telling a friend about your weekend. You could say, although it was raining, we decided to go hiking. Despite the weather, we had a great time. Nevertheless, we had to cut the hike short. However, we still enjoyed ourselves.
Those sentences are packed with advanced phrases. Let's repeat them. Although it was raining, we decided to go hiking. Despite the weather, we had a great time. Nevertheless, we had to cut the hike short. However, we still enjoyed ourselves.
Now, let's practice using idiomatic expressions in a conversation. Mason, can you think of a situation where we might use some idioms?
Sure. Imagine you're discussing a challenging project with a colleague. You might say, "We need to hit the ground running to meet our deadline. We might have to burn the midnight oil, but we can't afford to drop the ball. Let's break the ice with the new team members and get started."
Those are great idioms. Let's repeat them. Hit the ground running, burn the midnight oil, drop the ball, break the ice.
Using idiomatic expressions makes your language sound more natural and fluent. Now, let's put it all together in a casual conversation.
Sounds good. Let's imagine we're planning a trip.
All right, Sophia, if it rains this weekend, what should we do?
If it rains, we will go to the museum instead of the park. Although the park is our first choice, the museum will be fun too.
Good plan. Despite the weather, we can still have a great time. By the way, did you hear about the new exhibit at the museum?
Yes, I did. It was organized by the same person who curated the last exhibit. The last exhibit, which we both loved, was amazing.
That's great to hear. Nevertheless, we should be prepared for any changes. If we had known about this earlier, we could have planned better.
True, but we'll make the most of it. However, we still need to finalize our plans. Let's hit the ground running and book our tickets.
Agreed. We might have to burn the midnight oil to get everything done, but it will be worth it.
Definitely. And we shouldn't drop the ball on any details. Let's break the ice with some new team members who might join us.
That was a fun exercise. Sophia, we used complex grammatical structures, advanced phrases, and idiomatic expressions all in one conversation.
Yes, it was a great way to practice. Let's repeat some of those key phrases and words for our listeners.
Sure. If it rains, we will go to the museum. Although the park is our first choice, despite the weather, we can still have a great time. The exhibit, which we both loved. Nevertheless, we should be prepared. However, we still need to finalize our plans, hit the ground running, burn the midnight oil, drop the ball, break the ice.
Repeating these phrases helps reinforce their usage. Practicing these structures and expressions will make your English more fluent and natural.
Absolutely. And don't forget, using stories and real-life situations can make practicing these structures more engaging and memorable.
This has been a wonderful session, Mason. Thank you for your insights and examples.
My pleasure, Sophia, and thank you to our listeners for joining us.
Stay tuned for more episodes where we'll continue to explore advanced English topics.
This episode provided an engaging way to practice and apply complex grammatical structures, advanced phrases, and idiomatic expressions through stories and real-life examples. If you have any other specific requests or need further assistance, feel free to let me know.